read your thoughts. From the future.
The movies of 1985.
Hello and welcome to the movies of 1985. This is a podcast where I, Jason Hutchins, trapped in the year 1985, watch a different movie from 1985 every week on videotape as rented from a video store in Perth, Western Australia. Now, how do I select which movie to watch, you ask? Well, I've got a spreadsheet on my Commodore 64 and I roll a random number from a bingo machine to select a row in that spreadsheet. And that tells me what to watch. It's as simple as that. I explain it every week. Hopefully you know the drill by now. So let's just roll that bingo machine and see what pops out. And the number's out, and it's number 27. 27, so let's look that up in the spreadsheet. And number 27, this is a movie called Twice in a Lifetime. I'm not too sure about this one. I think it might be a bit of a slow romantic movie. I don't know too much about it, but what I do know is it was almost impossible to find. So if you're in the year 2025, well, you might not have much luck tracking it down. I don't think it will be on any streaming services. You might not even be able to find it on the dark webs. In fact, you might have to order the DVD. But in the year 1985, what I can do, of course, is ride my bike over to Video Connection in Subiaco, where I'll show my membership card, pay a few dollars and rent that. So while I'm doing that, I'm going to flick on the TV and you can watch an ad.
This week, the Dollar Dazzler catalogue means even more value at Coles New World. So don't miss Dollar Dazzler savings like Big Ben pies, 5 for $2. Spread-roll table margarine, only $1. Continental chicken noodle soup, 7 for $2.
Okay, I'm back.
And
Got
sides
it.
of lamb,
Put it in.
$1.69 a kilo.
When you add it all up, the best
There
value
we go.
is with Coles New World.
And let's just pause before the movie begins. I've got the video cassette in my hand. This is a rarity. It is a really hard one to get. And I think that's because the director, what's his name, Bud somebody, he sort of financed this himself. He was actually a producer and is known as the producer of Blade Runner and the Blade Runner 2049 sequel, amongst other things. Also a bit of a TV director, but he financed this himself and he promoted it himself and I think distributed it himself. Maybe he had some sort of weird arrangement with the studio, so it is a hard movie to track down. Now, looking at the cover, there's the Twice in a Lifetime text in purple down the bottom. That's the title of the movie. The T and the L are lined up. They're on separate lines and they are sort of tied together, like they're making a ribbon, I guess, to symbolize marriage. But of course, this is the second time around. Right up the top, it lists the cast and Margaret, Gene Hackman, Ellen Burstyn, the great Ellen Burstyn, I think, if you've ever seen Requiem for a Dream by Aaron Aronofsky. It's just one of my favorite movies and she has such a great performance there. Now, there's a photograph of Gene Hackman and Ellen Burstyn. They're the married couple and it's ripped down the middle. So obviously they break up. And then there's a photograph of, at the top, Gene Hackman and Margaret laughing over a glass of champagne in a bar. So, and then there's a blurb across all of that says one of the year's 10 best in quotation marks, but not attributed to anybody. So, yeah, claiming it's in the top 10 rather than the best movie of the year or something is, I guess, being a bit more realistic. Now, over on the back, there's a photograph of 6 separate people. There's Gene Hackman in a miner's helmet or something, or he works in a factory, doesn't he? Then there's Margaret and Ellen Burstyn, and then the rest of the cast. There's Brian Dennehy and Ali Sheedy, I think, and somebody else. Don't remember off the top of my head who they are. I can't see them. And then the quote on the back says, "The day Harry Mackenzie turned 50, he came home from work at the steel mill, had dinner with his wife, daughters and grandchildren, went to a local bar for a few drinks with his pals, and fell in love. It was the last thing he expected. He never wanted to hurt Kate, the woman with whom he'd spent 30 years, but Harry suddenly realised that he was 50 years old in a comfortable but empty marriage and that miraculously he'd been given a second chance. Harry decided to take it. What happened to Harry? What happened to his home, his children, his whole life? Is the honest and touching story told in Twice in a Lifetime. And that's basically it. So I think without further ado, let's press play on tape and watch Twice in a Lifetime.
Happy birthday, Grandpa.
Something is happening in the Mackenzie family that will change their lives forever.
Tonight, fellas, the drinks are on me!
You're gonna have to wear a padded bra. Shut up.
Well, you are.
Stop!
Nick!
I'm doing great, all on my own. I didn't need anybody. And then I meet this guy in a bar.
Gene Hackman,
I'm not just a guy in a bar, you know. I love you.
Anne Margaret,
Prove it.
Ellen Burstyn,
I've been hurt. Real hurt.
Amy Madigan,
What kind of stinking little games you think you're playing in here?
Ryan Dennehy,
So she knows, huh? It's still wrong, Harry.
Ali Sheedy,
It took you 30 years to find out what we already know.
Twice in a Lifetime, a Bud Yorkin film.
I went into this movie really expecting not to like it at all because it is a very much an adult drama. It's like Kramer versus Kramer or something like that. Just a run-of-the-mill drama, nothing special. I thought I was going to get bored to tears, but I really liked it. Gene Hackman is really good in this movie. I reckon probably his best performance. And even though it is about a couple splitting up, I mean, the performances are so good and the acting's great. The story is quite interesting. So it had me captivated, which is weird. Now, am I going to give it a big rating? I don't know. I would say it's 3.5. 3.5. Not going to give it a Mintox because it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. But basically, this movie is an uncredited remake of a BBC movie called Kisses at 50, which came out in 1973. And its theme song was written and performed by Paul McCartney. I've heard of that guy. Now, the theme song plays over the end credits, but they never mention that he wrote it. I think maybe in the opening credits it's there, but I must admit I forgot to take notes during the opening part of this movie. So what I normally do is go through the first 15 or 20 minutes or so just to describe what happens, and I'll try and do that. It opens in a factory, and that's interesting because I think last week we had a factory, didn't we, in My Life as a Dog. There was a factory scene. Now, this is similar. Last week it was a glass factory. This week it's a steel works, and that's where Gene Hackman's character works. So the opening credits are a montage of everything going on, all these men on the factory floor pouring molten steel, and Gene Hackman is in amongst them doing all the work, rolled up his sleeves and doing that work himself. Now, from there he returns home, and it turns out that he's returning home to his house with his wife and children and his grandchildren, because let's remember, he's just turning 50 years old. So, of course, he's a doddering old man with grandchildren. I say that because I'm in that age group myself, and I'm not even considering grandchildren popping onto the scene just yet. But he returns home for his 50th birthday celebrations, and his family's gather around him. He kind of looks like he really doesn't want to be there. He doesn't say too much, but his oldest daughter reads out birthday cards, like well wishes from all sorts of people, and it's very nice and very homely. But like I say, he might as well be somewhere else. his oldest daughter eventually reads out a birthday card written by his wife, which is Ellen Burstyn, who's fabulous in this movie. I really like her. She's written a bit of a poem about him, and when you hear it read out, you realise just what an empty life he leads. It's basically he works in a factory and then comes home and watches TV on the sofa, drinks beer down the pub with his mates, and watches the local football team on the weekends. And that's basically the long and short of his life. And I think maybe that dawns on him that he's in a bit of a rut at that moment. Now, later on, everyone goes home and his wife goes and watches TV. And if you've seen Ellen Burstyn in Requiem for a Dream, where she plays someone who is addicted to watching game shows on TV, among other things, that movie's all about addiction. I mean, in this movie, she watches TV. She's watching game shows and all sorts of things. And basically, that's her outlet. Gene Hackman, by the way, he was in Enemy of the State in the movies of 1999 that we watched last year. And he sadly passed away earlier this year, didn't he? I won't go into that. I also forgot to mention that his younger daughter is played by Ali Sheedy from The Breakfast Club and St. Elmo's Fire. I think all three of those movies came out in 1985. She's also known for being in War Games, which was 1983, and Short Circuit the following year in 1986. Anyway, what happens is Gene Hackman has celebrated his birthday with his family, and he eventually decides to go down the local pub by himself without his wife to celebrate with all his mates. And he walks in there and it's party time. Everyone's waiting to wish him happy 50th. They've made a banner. People have paid for his drinks. They've bought him presents. And there's a new bartender or barmaid, whatever you call them. And he falls in love with her. And she's played by Anne Margaret. Now, Anne Margaret is a hyphenated first name, Anne-Margaret. And she just goes by her first name. She's an actor who came over to the US from Sweden and dropped her last name, which was Olsen, I believe. So Gene Hackman falls in love with Anne Margaret. They ended up kissing in front of everybody in the bar, and they quickly begin an affair. And that, I think, is pretty much the first 20 minutes of the movie and sets things up nicely. So, like I said, I did really enjoy this movie. Now, what was interesting as well is this is the second film that was written by Colin Welland that features a synthesizer-driven soundtrack. The first movie that he wrote was Chariots of Fire, where Vangelis, of course, was the composer. Now, so Colin Welland wrote the original Kisses at 50 that this movie is based upon. So that was quite interesting. So what more can I say about this movie? It basically plays out exactly like you would expect. Gene Hackman falls in love with the barmaid, decides to have an affair, but he's honest when confronted with the facts, honest with his wife and his children, and eventually he moves out and goes his own way. What was interesting is the director of this movie and Gene Hackman were both going through divorces while the movie was being made. So it's almost a cathartic thing for them. You would think Ellen Burstyn had already been divorced. But when you watch the progression of Gene Hackman's character, he's not really very sympathetic. You kind of feel a little bit sad for him at the end because he walks away from this loving family. In fact, he walks away from them on the day of his younger daughter's wedding, which is crazy. And he just walks down the street while everyone's in the house celebrating. That's the life that he's chosen for himself. So I didn't really see it as a pro-divorce or a pro-male story at all. I felt really sympathetic for the women in this story, and I felt a bit sorry for Gene Hackman's character. But like I say, it was an interesting watch. I was more interested than I thought I would be. and 3.5 stars from me. But now,
I'm driving along and I'm just singing my song. I'm in a news-free zone.
Welcome to the News Free Zone, that time of the podcast where we look back at the news from 40 years ago and what happened this week in 1985, basically so we can ignore what's happening in 2025. Now, there's a lot of big news this week, a lot of news that's very interesting to me, but the first thing I have to mention is this week in 1985, the News Free Zone premiered. That's right, the News Free Zone, a daily TV show on the ABC TV in Australia, hosted by Graham Bond, who just sang the theme song that we heard just there. It ran every weekday for 10 weeks while the news was playing on all the other TV stations. So if you didn't want to watch the news, you could have switched to the ABC and watched News Free Zone. This was a half-hour comedy series, and it had a lot of different segments that were regular. So it had a little sitcom that lasted for 5 minutes called Australia Street, where it was about a share house where every person in the share house represented a state of Australia. So they lived at 85 Australia Street. There was Victoria Bitter, Tassie Franklin, Sunny Brisbane, and so forth. So the character from Sydney was a fast-talking criminal. The character from Victoria was a conservative social climbing snob. The character from Perth was a yachtsman obsessed by money and real estate, and so forth. There was another one which was called The Party Line, which I think was someone at a telephone exchange. It was like a drama with one person listening to everything else that was going on in the town. There was a segment called Never Ending Story, where they, over the course of 50 episodes, they just improvised a story that never ended based on prompts from the host and so forth. It was quite interesting. I remember really enjoying it as a kid, and I've remembered that theme song, which is why I've used it in this podcast. Now, the other news from this week in 1985 is the Commodore Amiga had its launch at the Lincoln Center in New York City, which was a black tie gala event featuring Andy Warhol demonstrating how to use the Amiga to digitally take a snapshot of Deborah Harry, so they were both present, and then colour in that snapshot in, Andy Warhol's style. So that was quite good. We'll get back to that later. Also, Aldous Corporation this week released PageMaker 1.0, which was a big turning point for the world of desktop publishing. I think they basically coined the term desktop publishing, and you could buy the Apple laser printer, which had dropped in price, and PageMaker only cost $495 US. So you could pair that with a laser printer, which I think was around about $5,000 or $8,000 US, and you'd have your own little publishing setup, wouldn't you? Also, this week in 1985, Nintendo released the Family Computer Robot, part of the Famicom launch, ROB, in Japan. Now, this was their strategy to get the NES into toy stores. So they were bouncing back from the big video game crash, which was around 1983, and their strategy was to treat these video game consoles as a toy, which they could do by packaging it with this little robot, which would get it into the toy stores and then in the hands of kids for Christmas, presumably. Now, what else happened? So the National Lampoon's European Vacation was launched this week, finally dethroning Back to the Future after its 11-week reign at number 1. Disney released The Black Cauldron, which bombed, opening to a $4.18 million box office against a record $44 million budget. And it bombed so hard it almost ended Disney Animation Studios. Now, I haven't chosen European Vacation nor The Black Cauldron for the podcast. That's not in the bingo machine. It's not in the Commodore 64 at all. But I would recommend watching both of those movies if you wanted to get into the 1985 spirit. Finally, the last bit of news from 1985 this week is that President Reagan welcomed the Chinese president to the White House this week in 1985, with the United States agreeing to sell nuclear technology to China as long as it wasn't used for military purposes. This was intended as a counterweight to Soviet dominance in the whole nuclear program and the whole nuclear scene. This triangular diplomacy, exemplified Reagan's pragmatic approach, but maybe backfired a bit. If you look back at it these days, I'm not sure about that. Anyway, now I'd like to go over to Usenet. Now, Usenet was 1985's version of social media. You can read 40-year-old archives on olduse.net. I like to read it daily. It's quite interesting to see news unfolding in real time. This week on net.cooks, Sue Bresden, who worked at AT&T, posted probably the most disgusting recipe for a casserole that really is the quintessential essence of 1985 cooking, I think. With the only fresh ingredient in this recipe is a small onion. So it's a pack of corn tortillas, 1 pound of Velveeta or Velveeta, which is some kind of ultra-processed cheese-like product, which I've never seen in Australia, 8 ounces of sour cream, a can of Rotel tomatoes, which is a Mexican product, that tomatoes and green chilies, and a can of chicken, like a can of chicken. What the hell? It's like buying a can of tuna, I suppose. Anyway, what she does is she mixes it all together and microwaves it, melting the cheese on top, and then adds it to the oven to brown things off. And I don't know, you just eat that slop. It sounds pretty disgusting. I just wanted to call it out because it sort of made me feel a bit queasy. Over on net.micro, Eric Levitsky and others posted that they had attended the Amiga launch that we talked about in the news section. And he posted this: "Never in my life have I been left so totally awestruck and speechless as I was tonight." So you can imagine, if you've seen an Amiga, I mean, I got an Amiga around 1980. No, that's a lie. I got one, I think, in 1990. Now, it was launched in 1985. In 1985, I was just getting a Commodore 64. I'd never even heard of an Amiga in 1985. This blew people away. People had a Macintosh, which was monochrome, but the Amiga had 4,096 colours and had digital sound. It was crazy. So he posted all about just what a shock it was to see this thing in action. He wrote things like the sound was superb. A guy played the keyboard and it sounded exactly like an electric guitar playing Smoke on the Water. Commodore surprised everyone. They also just showed it running Lotus 123 with a PC emulator at launch, which is kind of interesting. They also showed Microsoft Basic multitasking, and Microsoft announced that this was their best version of Basic to date, merging all of the best features from the PC and Mac version and taking full advantages of the Amiga's capabilities. Like I said, they had Andy Warpole and Deborah Harry there to show digitization of an image, and they had some artists showing how to use the digital sound as well. Trip Hawkins of Electronic Arts, formerly of Apple, he was there displaying all their latest games. So Commodore just went over the top of this launch and people were just absolutely gushing about it. It's quite interesting to sort of read the on-the-ground reporting of people posting their reactions to this in the moment, well before they got their hands on a machine themselves. If only I had a time machine. What am I talking about? I'm stuck here in 1985. I don't have my Amiga yet. I've got 5 more years to wait. Anyway, until next week, don't forget, no news is good news.
Please respect me in the morning. Am I reading from the Book of Idiots? I don't know what's happening. Don't talk about me when I'm gone. Join in if you'd like at the end, honey. You know the things you say will return against yourself someday. Don't talk about me when I'm gone. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Now I'm on my way. Hey. And I don't care what you say. I'm going home.